The call came at 3:17 a.m. It was an hour reserved for the truly damned. Bakers pulling the first trays of bread from hellishly hot ovens, third-shift security guards nursing lukewarm coffee in the lobbies of silent office towers, and the men who cleaned up the world's quiet disasters. Elias Vance was one of the latter. The phone on his nightstand didn't ring. It didn't chirp or play a soothing melody. It vibrated with a frantic, tooth-rattling intensity that seemed to shake the very molecules of the air in his sterile Georgetown apartment. The custom haptic pattern, a jarring staccato buzz, was a language in itself. A message of pure, unadulterated dread reserved for a single, terrifying classification. Cobalt Sierra. A compromised operation of the highest possible sensitivity. A house of cards, meticulously built over years, now collapsing in a hurricane. He was out of bed before the first vibration cycle ended, his bare feet hitting the cold, polished hardwood with a silent thud. There was no fumbling for the device, no bleary-eyed confusion. His movements were a study in fluid economy, a physical grammar honed by 2 decades of answering calls that meant someone, somewhere, was about to die. Or worse, was about to be taken apart piece by piece in a concrete basement. He pressed his thumb to the cool glass screen. The phone unlocked with a biometric scan that simultaneously triggered a silent, encrypted data burst to a server buried 1,000 feet beneath the Virginia countryside. It was a digital handshake, a cryptographic flare in the dark. I am awake. I am responding. Acknowledge. The voice on the other end was stripped of all protocol, raw and frayed by sheer panic. It was Paul Donovan, the Vienna station chief. A good man, a career officer who was usually as calm and unreadable as a frozen lake. Now he sounded like he was gargling gravel. Elias, it's Nightingale. It's completely blown. God, it's a fucking bloodbath. Elias didn't waste a precious second on questions like how or are you sure? Donovan wouldn't make a Cobalt Sierra call unless the sky was falling. Sitrep, now. His voice was a low growl, devoid of sleepiness, already locked into the cold calculus of disaster management. The whole network. The SVR is rolling them up as we speak. Rostova is dark. Sokolov. Christ, Elias, we don't know. They hit the primary safe house an hour ago. It was a ghost team, Zaslan operators by the look of the ordnance and the speed of the breach. They were waiting. They knew we were there. Elias was already moving through the darkness of his apartment, his path memorized, his actions automated. He pulled on a pair of dark gray tactical trousers and a black Henley, the fabric cool against his skin. His mind, however, was on fire. It was a flurry of impossibly fast calculations, a cascade of collapsing timelines, burning assets, and compromised protocols. Operation Nightingale wasn't just another mission. It was the crown jewel, the culmination of a 3-year, 9-figure effort to exfiltrate Dr. Ivan Sokolov. Sokolov was the chief architect of Russia's new avant-garde hypersonic glide vehicle guidance system, a weapon that threatened to make every missile defense shield on the planet obsolete. He was a man whose brain held the keys to upsetting the global balance of power for a generation. And the tip of that spear, the woman on the ground who had spent 18 grueling months cultivating him, was Eva Rostova. She was more than an asset. She was one of his. He had been her final instructor at the farm, the one who had pushed her to the breaking point and watched her rebuild herself stronger. He was the one who signed off on her readiness, who had seen the rare spark of intuitive genius burning behind her cool, analytical gray eyes. The thought of her in the hands of Zaslan, the SVR's paramilitary hunters, was a physical sickness. How did they find them, Paul? Elias's voice was dangerously calm, the quiet at the center of a storm. What was the point of entry? Was it a signal intercept? A human source? There was a pause on the line, a hesitation filled with the crackling static of professional shame and abject failure. The cover, Elias. It was the NOC, Ethelred Logistics. Elias felt the blood in his veins turn to ice. Ethelred was the non-official cover, the sterile, triple-backstopped corporation created to give Rostova a plausible reason for being in Vienna, for meeting with a high-level scientist. It was a masterpiece of bureaucratic fiction, a ghost company with a paper trail stretching back a decade, complete with fabricated tax returns, phantom employee records, and a registered office in a bland Viennese commercial district. It was designed to withstand the most invasive forensic accounting, the most suspicious state-level scrutiny. It was supposed to be untouchable. What about it? Elias pressed, his voice like grinding stone. Donovan's next words would echo in the halls of Langley for years, a cautionary tale whispered in hushed tones. A journalist, a stringer for a German paper, an SVR asset we'd been tracking but had marked as low level. He got curious. He wrote in his notes that the company felt thin, insubstantial. So he did what any curious person would do in the 21st century. He looked up the corporate registration online. He found the phone number. And? Elias braced himself, a knot of dread tightening in his gut. And he called it, Elias. He called the multi-million-dollar, state-of-the-art, deep-cover NOC platform. Donovan's voice cracked, the sound of a career immolating. It went to a pizza place. Gino's Pizza, home of the double pepperoni special. The journalist recorded the call. We have the audio from his laptop, which we just hacked. You can hear the guy on the other end asking if he wants extra cheese. For a single, silent, stupefying moment, the entire, sprawling, multi-billion-dollar architecture of American foreign intelligence was balanced on the greasy crust of a double pepperoni pizza. The cosmic absurdity of it was a physical blow. All the technology, all the satellites, all the training, all the human sacrifice, undone by a misconfigured phone line. It was more than a mistake. It was a cosmic joke with a punchline written in blood and mozzarella. I'm on my way, Elias said, the words clipped and final. The line went dead. He didn't pack a bag. Everything he needed was already pre-positioned in a dozen cities around the globe. He walked to a closet that appeared to hold nothing but a few spare suits and a row of shoes. He pressed his palm against a specific point on the dark wood paneling. There was a soft hiss of hydraulics, and a section of the wall receded, revealing a steel compartment bathed in a cool blue LED light. Inside was his Go Kit. A Thuraya X T Pro satellite phone, a set of titanium lockpicks nestled in a leather roll, a Leatherman Charge plus TTI multi-tool with a carbon fiber handle, 10 passports, each with a fully backstopped legend and embedded RFID chip, and a small, featureless black pistol. It was a Sig Sauer P365, customized with a ported barrel to reduce muzzle flip, and loaded with a magazine of 124-grain Speer Gold Dot hollow point rounds. He took the phone and a passport bearing the name David Chance, a management consultant from Chicago. The gun remained. This was a problem for the brain, not the trigger finger. Not yet. As the pre-dawn sky over Washington began to lighten from inky black to a bruised purple, a black Chevrolet Suburban with diplomatic plates and tinted windows slid to a halt in front of his building. He was inside before the driver had fully engaged the parking brake. The destination was not Dulles or Andrews Air Force Base. It was a nondescript office park in Fairfax, a building with no name, only a number. 1776. Inside was the Crisis Action Center, a SCIF, sensitive compartmented information facility, where the digital ghosts of blown operations were dissected and autopsied. The room was a vortex of controlled panic. The air was thick with the smell of stale coffee, ozone from the humming server racks, and the faint, metallic tang of fear. Analysts with hollowed-out eyes and 2 days of stubble stared at glowing screens, their fingers flying across keyboards in a desperate attempt to map the extent of the damage. Donovan was on a large monitor via a secure video link from the Vienna embassy, his face a pale mask of exhaustion. At the head of a long conference table, her arms crossed, stood Director Catherine Price. She was a formidable woman in her late 50s, a veteran of the Cold War back alleys, and her expression was one of glacial fury. "Vance," she said, her voice cutting through the low hum of electronics like a shard of glass. "Walk me through the failure point. I want to know how a $10 pizza joke just cost us a $500 million intelligence network and potentially the most valuable defector of the century." Elias ignored the chair offered to him. He remained standing, his eyes scanning the data streams being projected onto the walls. Asset call signs were blinking from green to red, one after another, like lights on a Christmas tree from hell. Safe house locations were being flagged as compromised. It was a digital massacre. "The number," Elias began, his voice flat, a deliberate monotone to mask his own rage. "It was part of the NOC package procured for us by a third-party contractor, a shell company specialist based in Luxembourg. Standard procedure for plausible deniability. They acquire aged shelf corporations, complete with bank accounts, addresses, and phone numbers. The numbers are supposed to be clean, dormant business lines that have been out of circulation for at least 5 years. "Supposed to be," Price repeated, the words dripping with acid. "Someone in the procurement department at the contractor's office got lazy or cheap," an analyst interjected, not looking up from his screen. "They bought a block of recycled numbers from a telecom clearinghouse. This one was disconnected from the pizzeria 6 months ago, but was never fully scrubbed from legacy online business directories and mapping services. When the SVR's pet journalist ran a deep search using a web scraping algorithm, he found both listings, the old one for Gino's Pizza and the new one for Ethelred Logistics, both linked to the same number. It was a loose thread. They pulled it, and the entire tapestry had unraveled. The SVR hadn't needed to crack their encryption or turn one of their agents. They had just followed the smell of cheese and tomato sauce. Once they had that thread, they would have put Ethelred under a microscope powered by the full resources of the state. They would have seen Eva Rostova, listed as a project manager, meeting with a client, Dr. Sokolov. They would have deployed surveillance, mapped their patterns, identified their dead drops, and waited with terrifying patience. They waited until the exfiltration was imminent, and then they struck, maximizing the damage, aiming to capture not just the agent and the defector, but the entire support network. "Rostova is alive," Elias stated. It wasn't a question. He was willing it to be true. Price nodded grimly. "We believe so. Her personal locator beacon, a micro-transmitter woven into the seam of her coat, gave a final ping 2 hours ago from the Prater district. Then it went dead. She activated the wipe protocol, which means she knew she was being hunted and had to destroy her agency-issued tech. She's in the wind, alone, with no support, and the entire Vienna contingent of the SVR's Zaslon unit hunting her. Zaslon, the barrier. The SVR's most ruthless paramilitary arm, specializing in snatch-and-grab operations and wet work. They weren't intelligence officers. They were hunters. What about Sokolov? Vanished. Donovan's voice crackled from the monitor. He wasn't at the primary safe house when they hit it. Rostova must have moved him. She was always one step ahead. The question is, for how long? Elias turned his full attention to the main tactical display, a satellite map of Vienna overlaid with flashing red data points. She has an emergency protocol. It's called the Labyrinth. It's a deep contingency plan we drilled for a month at the farm. It's for a total system collapse scenario. No comms, no support, no infrastructure. Will it work? Price asked, her skepticism palpable. It's designed to keep her alive and mobile for 72 hours, Elias said, his gaze fixed on the map of the city that had become Ava's prison. But it was never meant to be used against a saturation hunt like this. It's a playbook, and the SVR knows we use playbooks. They'll be anticipating her moves, flooding her potential escape routes. So we need a new play, Price concluded. We need to get her a new playbook, Elias corrected, his voice hardening. And we need to do it now. The mission had fundamentally changed. It was no longer about a quiet, clandestine exfiltration. It was about a kinetic, violent extraction. The first step was the most impossible: re-establishing contact. All of Ava's standard communication channels were burned. Her sat phone, her encrypted messaging apps, her shortwave radio that broadcast on a burst frequency of 462.5625 megahertz. Using any of them would be like sending up a flare in the dead of night. The SVR would be listening to every conceivable frequency. Elias walked over to a haggard-looking communications specialist. I need a message in a bottle. Protocol Echo 7. The specialist, a young man with glasses so thick they magnified his eyes to an unnerving degree, paled. Sir, Echo 7 hasn't been used in a decade. It's a Cold War relic. The infrastructure is barely supported. Which is why it might work, Elias countered. The SVR will be looking for sophisticated digital signals intelligence. They won't be looking for ghosts in the machine. Protocol Echo 7 was brilliantly, terrifyingly simple in its conception. It involved embedding a coded message in the metadata of a seemingly innocuous file and uploading it to a public server so obscure, so utterly random, that no one would ever think to monitor it. The key was that the agent in the field had to know where to look. It was a one-way street, a shot in the dark across a digital ocean. For the next hour, Elias and the comms team worked with frantic precision. The target server they chose belonged to an online forum for collectors of antique German cuckoo clocks. It was a digital backwater, a place of mind-numbing banality filled with elderly hobbyists debating the merits of different wood stains and pendulum weights. Ava, Elias knew, had a photographic memory. During her training, he had made her memorize a list of 100 such obscure websites, each linked to a different emergency protocol. The Cuckoo Clock Forum was number 47. I am alive. I have the package. Await instructions. The message itself was a work of digital art. It was hidden not in the text of a post, but in the EXIF data of a JPEG image. The image was of a perfectly ordinary, if garishly ugly, Black Forest cuckoo clock. But embedded in the data fields for camera type, shutter speed, and lens aperture was a string of numbers. When decrypted using a one-time pad key that only Ava and Elias knew, it would give her a time and a place. Not for a meeting. That was far too risky. It was for a brush pass, a fleeting, momentary contact in a crowd where an object could be exchanged without a word. The object was the new playbook. It wasn't a document, it was a device. A coin, they called it. A covert optic information node. It looked like an ordinary €2 coin, slightly thicker perhaps, but unnoticeable to the casual eye. Inside its unassuming cupronickel shell, however, was a marvel of microengineering. It contained a solid-state memory chip with the new extraction plan, a micro battery, and a near-field communication transmitter. To read it, Ava would need a receiver, which she wouldn't have. But the coin had another function, a piece of inspired genius from the tech division. When placed on the screen of any standard smartphone, it would use the phone's own power source via piezoelectric transfer to project a focused, polarized light image that could only be seen through a pair of sunglasses with a corresponding polarizing filter. It was information hidden in plain sight. The plan was taking shape. A support agent from the Berlin station, a man named Gregor, would fly to Vienna as a tourist. He would go to the designated Brush Pass location, the main concourse of the Wien Hauptbahnhof, Vienna's central train station, at precisely 1400 hours the next day. He would be carrying a copy of the Frankfurter Allgemeine Zeitung and wearing a blue scarf. He would drop the coin as he bent to tie his shoe. Ava's job, her only job, was to be there, to see it, and to retrieve it without anyone noticing. Meanwhile, in Vienna, the city had become a cage. Ava Rostova had felt the net tighten hours before Donovan's panicked call would have reached Langley. It started not with a sound or a sight, but with a feeling, a cold prickle on the back of her neck that every good field operative learns to trust above all else. A man reading a newspaper on a park bench who wasn't turning the pages. A gray delivery van that circled the block twice. The subtle shift in the city's rhythm. The feeling of being watched not by one pair of eyes, but by 100. She was a fish who could feel the change in the water pressure that signaled the coming of a shark. She had immediately initiated the Labyrinth Protocol. First rule: sever all ties. She moved Sokolov from the primary safe house to an emergency fallback, a small anonymous apartment over a bakery in the Ottakring district, a working-class neighborhood far from the tourist-heavy city center. She told him to stay put, not to answer the door, and to eat the canned food she had stashed under the floorboards. He was terrified. A man of elegant equations and abstract theories thrust into a world of brutal, physical certainties. Next, she erased herself. She returned to her own apartment building, a place the SVR would be watching intently. She didn't go inside. From a cafe across the street, nursing a single espresso for an hour, she used a burner phone to remotely trigger a thermite charge she had planted inside her laptop and other electronics. The heat would be intense enough to melt the hard drives and silicon chips into a useless slag, destroying any data. Then she paid in cash, walked away, and melted into the lunchtime crowds, leaving behind the fictional life of the Ethelred Logistics project manager. Her transformation in the restroom of a bustling department store was a masterclass in tradecraft. The chic business attire was shed. The blonde wig she wore was discarded in a sanitary bin, revealing her own short, dark hair. Padded inserts in her jacket that altered her silhouette were removed. She emerged minutes later wearing jeans, a nondescript gray hoodie, a pair of non-prescription glasses, and a simple headscarf, changing her appearance from a sharp Western businesswoman to a nondescript local student. She moved through the city on foot and by tram, never taking the same line for more than 2 stops, constantly running counter-surveillance drills. She would abruptly stop to look in a shop window, using the reflection to study the crowd behind her. She entered a large building by the front door and exited through a service entrance in the back. She was a ghost, but she knew the hunters were right behind her. She had no weapons, save for her intellect and the brutal lessons Elias Vance had drilled into her at the farm. Her only tool was a small kit she carried in her purse at all times. A ceramic blade that wouldn't set off metal detectors, a vial of fast-acting sedative, and a length of garrote wire intricately woven into the strap of her bag. She was running on adrenaline and cold, hard training. Never panic. The moment you panic, you're dead. Assess, adapt, act. Her first priority was to check the signals. The Labyrinth protocol included a series of locations for sign-out marks. A specific chalk mark on a lamppost in the Stadtpark, a newspaper left on a particular park bench in the Volksgarten, a Fanta Kahn left in a trash receptacle near the Hofburg Palace. If the local station support team was still active, they would change the marks, signaling that they were still operational. She checked the first 3 locations. The marks were all gone, not just unchanged, but physically wiped away. That was worse. It meant the SVR hadn't just identified the network. They had captured the local agents and forced them to reveal the signaling protocols. The SVR was now hunting her using her own safety net. She was truly, utterly alone. Her only hope was the 1-in-a-million shot, the message in a bottle. She made her way to a public library, her nerves screaming, every synapse on fire. Every person who glanced at her for a second too long was a potential SVR agent. The librarian, the student at the next terminal, the old man dozing in the corner. She sat at a computer, her body angled to shield the screen, and navigated to the Cuckoo Clock forum. Her heart hammered against her ribs. The site was a sea of banal posts about clock maintenance and woodworking. It was a digital needle in a haystack of epic proportions. But she wasn't looking at the posts. She was looking for an image posted within the last few hours from a new user with a nonsensical username. And there it was. A user named pendulumswing_87 had posted a single image of a ridiculously ornate clock. She clicked on it, downloaded the image, and used a free online tool to view the EXIF data. Her breath caught in her throat. There, in the data fields for camera model and f-stop, was the string of numbers. She didn't need a computer to decrypt it. The one-time pad was seared into her memory. It was a simple substitution cipher, unbreakable without the key she had memorized under duress years ago. She did the mental calculation, her mind working with a speed and clarity that felt almost supernatural. The numbers resolved into a message. Hauptbahnhof, 1400, blue scarf, tying shoe, hope. It was a dangerous, intoxicating drug. But it was all she had. She had her instructions. Now she had to survive the next 18 hours and get to that train station. Back in the Fairfax SCIF, Elias watched the clock. The tension was a physical presence in the room. They had thrown their digital Hail Mary. Now it was up to Gregor, the agent from Berlin, to complete the pass. Gregor was a solid operator, a former GSG-9 commando who specialized in logistics and support. He wasn't a frontline operative like Ava, but he was reliable, and his nerves were steel. He landed in Vienna on a commercial flight, passed through immigration as a German tourist on a weekend trip to see the opera, and took a taxi to the city center. Elias and his team monitored his progress through the city's network of CCTV cameras, a capability provided by their Austrian intelligence counterparts, who were now in a state of apoplectic panic. They watched Gregor enter the sprawling modern train station, a river of humanity flowing around him. He bought a newspaper and a coffee, found a spot near the main departure boards, and leaned against a pillar, looking for all the world like a man waiting for his train. The SVR was there too. Elias could feel it in his bones. They knew Ava was a trained operative. They knew she would try to find a way to make contact. and a major transport hub was the most logical place. They wouldn't be obvious. They wouldn't be men in black coats with conspicuous earpieces. They would be the woman with the crying baby, the janitor sweeping a clean floor, the young couple kissing passionately by the ticket machine. They would be everywhere. Elias instructed the tech team to run facial recognition analysis on the live camera feeds, comparing the faces in the crowd against their database of known SVR officers. Almost immediately, they got a hit. A man buying a pretzel from a vendor near Gregor Dmitry Volkov, colonel in the SVR, head of their Vienna residency. A man known in the intelligence community as the Wolfhound for his relentless, patient tracking of targets. He wasn't just directing the operation from an office. He was on the ground, hunting himself. "Get Gregor out of there," Price ordered, her voice sharp. "Abort the pass. It's a trap." "No," Elias said, his eyes glued to the screen, his knuckles white where he gripped the back of a chair. "If we pull Gregor, we lose our only chance to reach her. She's there. I know she is. She's watching. She's assessing." He was right. Ava was on a mezzanine level overlooking the main concourse, concealed behind a large digital advertising board, its bright, flashing colors providing perfect cover. She had been in the station for over an hour, observing the patterns, the ebbs and flows of the crowd. She had spotted Gregor immediately, his blue scarf a beacon in the throng. But she had also spotted the watchers. It was the janitor who never seemed to stray more than 20 feet from Gregor. It was the woman with the stroller who had been circling the same area for 10 minutes. And it was the man at the pretzel stand, Volkov himself. She didn't know his name, but she knew what he was. His posture, his watchful stillness, the way his eyes never stopped scanning. He was the pack leader. It was a trap. They were using Gregor as bait, waiting for her to make her move so they could sweep her up. Her mind raced. Aborting was the logical choice. Disappear back into the city and try to survive. But without the information on that coin, she was just delaying the inevitable. She had to get it. She had to change the equation. She looked at the massive departure board. A high-speed railjet train to Budapest was departing in 5 minutes from Platform 9. An idea sparked, a wild, desperate gambit born of pure improvisation. She moved away from her vantage point, slipping down a service staircase and emerging near the platforms. She bought a bottle of water from a vending machine, took a long drink, and then, with calculated casualness, tripped, sending the remaining water splashing across the slick tile floor directly at the bottom of the escalator, leading down to Platform 9. Up on the concourse, Elias watched her move on a different camera feed, his breath catching in his throat. What is she doing? At precisely 13:59, 1 minute before the scheduled pass, a crisp, automated voice came over the station's public address system, announcing the departing train to Budapest. Gregor, following his instructions to the letter, looked at his watch. He bent down to tie his shoe, his hand going into his pocket for the coin. At that exact moment, a commotion erupted at the top of the escalator to Platform 9. A man in an expensive business suit had slipped on the wet floor Ava had created and taken a hard, theatrical fall. People gasped, a crowd started to form, and 2 transit police officers moved towards the incident. It was the perfect diversion. For a critical 5-second window, every eye in the vicinity, including those of Volkov's watchers, was drawn to the man on the floor. All except for Volkov himself, his gaze remained locked on Gregor, his instincts screaming that this was a trick. Ava, now wearing a baseball cap she had lifted from a souvenir stand, moved with the surge of passengers hurrying to catch the Budapest train. She wasn't running towards Gregor. She was moving past him, part of the river of people. As she passed, She dropped her own decoy, a cheap souvenir keychain. She bent to retrieve it, her body momentarily shielding Gregor's from Volkov's direct line of sight. Her hand darted out, her fingers brushing Gregor's as he held the coin. The exchange was seamless, a whisper of contact. She had the coin. He had the keychain. She didn't look back. She kept moving with the crowd, down the escalator and onto the train platform. Elias and the entire SCIF held their breath. They watched as Volkov, sensing something was wrong, began to move towards Gregor. Gregor, his part played, simply stood up, tied shoe and all, and began walking calmly towards the station exit, disappearing into the crowd. Volkov was faced with a choice: go after the bait, or trust his instincts that the real target was slipping away. He barked an order into his collar mic, and two of his agents broke off to follow Gregor. Volkov himself turned and sprinted towards the escalators for Platform 9, just as the train doors began to hiss shut. Ava was already inside, crammed into a vestibule, her heart threatening to beat its way out of her chest. She saw Volkov on the platform, his eyes scanning the windows, a look of pure fury on his face. Their eyes met for a fraction of a second through the thick, grimy glass. It was a moment of silent, primal communication. I see you. I am coming for you. Then the train lurched forward, pulling out of the station, carrying her away from the trap and deeper into enemy territory. The SCIF erupted in a ragged cheer. Price allowed herself a small, tight smile. She's a goddamn ghost. Get Gregor out of the city, now. Elias, what's her next move? Elias was already focused on the next phase. She's on a train to Budapest, but she won't stay on it. The Hungarians have a close relationship with the SVR. They'll have agents waiting at the Keleti station. She'll get off at the first unscheduled stop. A maintenance stop, a signal failure, anything. She'll jump from the train and go to ground in rural Hungary. But first, she needs to read the coin. Aboard the speeding train, Ava locked herself in a tiny, swaying bathroom. Her hands were shaking, the adrenaline finally catching up to her. She took the coin from her pocket. It felt heavy, dense with the information that was her only hope. She took out the cheap pair of polarized sunglasses she'd bought at a station kiosk. Her smartphone was gone, wiped and destroyed. But the plan accounted for that. She had to acquire a new one. At the next major stop, Győr, she disembarked. She knew SVR agents would be swarming the station, looking for a woman traveling alone. She approached a group of loud, backpacking Australian students, and with a mix of feigned panic and tearful charm, explained that she had lost her ticket and her wallet and needed to get to Budapest to meet her family. She was crying, vulnerable, and utterly convincing. They took pity on her, enveloping her in their noisy, chaotic group, buying her a new ticket and sharing their snacks. Hidden in their midst, she was invisible, a lone wolf hiding in a flock of sheep. One of the students lent her his phone to call her family. She palmed the coin, placed it on the screen, and angled it towards the light. Through her sunglasses, the text appeared, floating like a ghost on the phone's display. It was the new playbook. The plan was audacious. It wasn't an exfiltration route through a friendly border. It was a path deeper into the hornet's nest. The objective had changed. Sokolov was too high profile to move across a border now. Every checkpoint would have his face on it. The new plan was to get him to a temporary sanctuary, a place so public and yet so secure that the SVR wouldn't dare touch him. The American Embassy in Prague. It was hundreds of kilometers away, across 2 countries. The plan laid out on the coin was a logistical nightmare, a series of dead drops, vehicle swaps, and identity changes. The first step was to get back to Vienna. The SVR would never expect her to double back. She had to retrieve Sokolov and begin the long journey west. The coin gave her the location of a dead drop in a park in Győr, a magnetic case hidden inside a hollowed-out park bench leg. Inside, she would find a new passport, cash, and a set of car keys. The journey back to Vienna was a blur of tension. She drove a beat-up Skoda, staying on rural roads, her eyes constantly checking her rearview mirror. She crossed the border not at a major checkpoint, but at a small, unguarded crossing used by local farmers, a route detailed in the coin's data. When she reached the safe house in Ottakring, her heart pounded. The street was quiet. Too quiet. The smell of fresh bread from the bakery below seemed like a cruel mockery of normalcy. She didn't approach the building directly. She circled the block, observing from a distance. She saw it then. A faint glint of light from a window across the street. A surveillance team. They had found Sokolov. They hadn't stormed the building because they were waiting for her. The trap hadn't been at the train station. The train station was just the appetizer. This was the main course. She couldn't walk in, but she couldn't leave him. Elias's voice echoed in her head from a training session years ago. When the direct path is blocked, create a new one. Use the environment as a weapon. She looked at the bakery on the ground floor. An idea, born of desperation, began to form. Back in Fairfax, Elias watched the tracker on Ava's new phone, a burner she'd acquired from the dead drop, go stationary 2 blocks from Sokolov's location. "She's seen them," he said to the room. "She knows it's a trap." "Can she get him out?" Price asked, her voice tight. "If anyone can, she can." Ava entered a residential building 2 doors down from the bakery. She went up to the roof and, under the cover of darkness, made a daring leap across a narrow alley to the roof of the bakery building. She moved silently, a shadow among the chimney pots. She found the building's main gas intake valve. Using the pliers on her new multi-tool, she began to slowly, carefully bleed the line. Not enough to cause an explosion, but enough to create a significant, unmistakable gas leak that would soon permeate the entire building. Then she went back the way she came and, from a payphone 3 blocks away, made an anonymous call to the Vienna Fire Department, her voice disguised with a handkerchief over the receiver. 10 minutes later, the street was filled with flashing lights and screaming sirens. Fire trucks and police cars blocked the road. Firefighters in full gear began evacuating the entire building, including the apartments above the bakery. The SVR surveillance team across the street was suddenly faced with a nightmare scenario. Their controlled environment had become a circus of chaos. They couldn't move in without exposing themselves to the local authorities. Amidst the confusion, a firefighter led a coughing, bewildered Ivan Sokolov out of the building. Another firefighter, slightly smaller than the rest, her face obscured by a helmet and oxygen mask, guided him firmly towards a waiting ambulance. As the ambulance pulled away, the smaller firefighter gave a final look back at the SVR surveillance post. A look of cold defiance. Then she climbed into the passenger seat and the vehicle sped off, disappearing into the Vienna night. In the SCIF, a collective sigh of relief was released. Elias allowed himself a grim smile. It was a textbook move from the training manual. Use the enemy's caution and the local infrastructure against them. The ambulance was, of course, not a real ambulance. The paramedics were a 2-man team from the CIA's Prague station, dispatched as soon as Ava had confirmed she was going for the extraction. The vehicle was a Black Flight asset, a civilian vehicle modified with hidden compartments and advanced communications gear. But the race was far from over. Volkov was not a man to be trifled with. He would realize what had happened within minutes. He would have every SVR asset in Austria and the Czech Republic looking for that ambulance. The journey to the Czech border was a high-stakes shell game. The ambulance drove for 20 kilometers, then pulled into a deserted industrial park. Ava and Sokolov were transferred to a waiting cargo truck, hidden in a specially constructed compartment behind a false wall of cabbage crates. The ambulance, now empty, continued on a different route, acting as a decoy. Elias and his team were their eyes and ears, monitoring SVR communications intercepts and satellite imagery. "They found the ambulance," an analyst called out. "They're closing in on it, north of Hollabrunn." "Let them," Elias said. "Keep our eyes on the truck." The truck, carrying produce, rumbled towards the Czech border. As they approached the checkpoint, Ava gave Sokolov a mild sedative. He was a wreck, his nerves completely shot. The truck was waved through after a cursory inspection. They were in the clear. For now. The final leg of the journey was to Prague. They swapped vehicles one last time, to a diplomatic sedan with U.S. embassy plates, which met them in a forest outside Brno. As they drove into the ancient, beautiful city of Prague, Ava could finally allow herself to feel a sliver of hope. The embassy was a fortress, a sovereign piece of American soil. Once inside, Sokolov would be safe. They were less than a mile from the embassy gates, crossing the Manes Bridge, when a black Audi A8, moving with impossible speed, slammed into their rear quarter panel. The sedan spun out, the shriek of tortured metal echoing over the Vltava River as they crashed into the stone balustrade. The attack was brutally efficient. Before the screech of tires had faded, 2 more cars boxed them in. Men in black tactical gear, armed with AK-12 assault rifles, poured out. And leading them, his face a mask of cold fury, was Dmitry Volkov. He hadn't fallen for the decoys. He had anticipated their final move, their ultimate destination. He had let them get close, let them taste victory, only to snatch it away at the last possible second. The 2 Prague station agents in the front seats were already firing, laying down suppressive fire with their service Glocks. "Go!" one of them screamed at Ava, his face grim. "Get him to the gate. Go now!" Ava dragged the dazed Sokolov from the wreck. Gunfire erupted around them, chipping stone from the bridge, shattering the windows of their disabled car. It was a 700-meter sprint to the embassy gates, an impossible distance under fire. She half carried, half dragged the terrified scientist, his dead weight slowing her down. Volkov's men were fanning out and trying to flank them. A bullet whizzed past Ava's ear with a sound like a tearing hornet. She shoved Sokolov behind a large stone statue. "Stay here," she yelled, and did the one thing they would never expect. She charged back towards them. She ran in a weaving, unpredictable pattern, drawing their fire. She was armed now, with the Sig Sauer from the Dead Drop kit. She wasn't trying to win a firefight. She was buying time. She fired 2 rounds at the lead vehicle's tires, then another at a streetlight above their heads, sending a shower of glass down on them. It was just enough. The Marine security guards at the embassy gate, alerted by the gunfire, had opened the final barrier and were now taking up defensive positions, their M4 rifles glinting in the afternoon sun. The Prague station chief was on the line with the local police, screaming about a terrorist attack on a diplomatic vehicle. Ava sprinted back to Sokolov, pulled him to his feet, and they made the final, desperate dash. Bullets chewed up the pavement around their feet. 50 meters, 20-10. They stumbled through the embassy gates just as the Marines opened fire, their superior firepower driving Volkov and his team back to their vehicles. As the heavy steel gates boomed shut behind them, Ava collapsed onto the cobblestones, her lungs burning, her body screaming in protest. Sokolov was safe. Operation Nightingale, though battered and burned and horrifically compromised, was a success. Days later, in a secure debriefing room at Langley, Elias Vance sat across from a clean, rested, and composed Ava Rostova. The official report was already written. The failure was attributed to a catastrophic but accidental procedural error by a third-party contractor. Heads would roll in the private sector, protocols would be updated, and the agency would move on. But Elias couldn't let it go. It was too neat. Too stupidly, perfectly, absurdly neat. The pizza place, it gnawed at him. Intelligence failures were rarely this comical. They were usually subtle, a slow poison of betrayal or a cascade of minor, interlocking mistakes. This was a sledgehammer in a world of scalpels. After the debrief, he went to the archives. He pulled the full procurement file for Ethelred Logistics. He spent 12 hours straight digging through encrypted invoices, subcontractor vetting reports, and communication logs, fueled by black coffee and a gnawing dissatisfaction. And then, he found it. A single line item, buried in an annex to an annex. The block of recycled phone numbers had been purchased by the contractor, but the specific number for Ethelred, the one that led to Gino's Pizza, had been requested, specifically assigned, by their Langley liaison in the logistics division. A quiet, overlooked man named Marcus Thorne. Elias felt a chill crawl up his spine. He pulled Thorne's file. A 20-year man, passed over for promotion multiple times, known for being meticulous but unremarkable. His security reviews were spotless. His financials were clean, almost too clean for a man on a GS-14 salary with 2 kids in private school. Elias kept digging, cross-referencing Thorne's personal data with dark web intelligence. He found a ghost. A single, heavily encrypted financial transaction. A payment into a cryptocurrency wallet that Elias's team could, with some difficulty, link to a holding company known to be a front for SVR money laundering. The payment was made 2 days before the Ethelred number was assigned. It was the motive. But it wasn't the proof. The SVR would never be so clumsy as to make a direct link. The final piece of the puzzle came from an utterly unexpected place. Thorne's annual family health declaration. It was a mundane piece of HR paperwork. Under the section for dependents' special needs, Thorne had listed his youngest son's severe celiac disease. He had a gluten allergy. Elias sat back in his chair, the pieces clicking into place with a horrifying, final clarity. He remembered a conversation by the coffee machine months ago, Thorne complaining about how hard it was to find food his son could eat, especially pizza, which the boy loved but could rarely have. With trembling fingers, Elias navigated to a Viennese restaurant review website. He looked up Gino's Pizza, and there it was, right on their online menu, proudly displayed in a bold, colorful font. Voted Vienna's one for gluten-free deep dish pizza. It wasn't a mistake. It wasn't a random, recycled number. It was a signal. Thorne had chosen that specific number, knowing it was still linked to the pizzeria in some online directories. He had embedded a message inside a mistake. Who would ever suspect that the catastrophic, company-wide embarrassment was, in fact, a deliberate act of treason? It was the perfect cover. The SVR would see the pizzeria, know it was a message from their asset, and know exactly which operation to target.